And there's, so I've got 3 jurisdictions then, right?
Let me go through. I'm catching attendance right now, and then I will let you know.
Okay.
1 second.
And John, Brandy is on her way, but she's running a little late.
Okay. And I think actually, believe it or not, we don't need a lot for quorum. I think it's only 4. So I think we're going to be good. Now, did Brandy want us to sort of hold off on any particular item? Because we can sort of rearrange things if that's helpful.
She did not request that.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. So.
Well, it's a few minutes after. How about we go ahead and get started? Call this meeting to order.
Yep. If Jess says we've got quorum, which I think we do, but she's smarter than I am.
We got the thumbs up.
So all yours, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I hope everyone's had a chance to review today's agenda. So let's get a motion on that. If I can ask for a motion to approve today's agenda.
Bill, this is Gail Sturdivant. I move to we approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Gail. Can we have?
Victoria, second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that item? Okay, great. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. Unmute yourselves first.
Aye.
Aye.
There's Brian.
Aye.
Thank you. I'm going to assume, and so I want to assume that any opposed, please say nay. Okay, motion passes. Agenda is approved as posted. Thank you, everyone. Okay, are there any public comments we need to chat about that did not make it to the agenda?
I think my only public comment is, how does Horace vote in favor of something?
Took me a little bit to get that, John. Thank you. Okay, so with no public comments, let's move on to approval of the February 17th meeting minutes. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to review those. So if we can have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from last month, please.
Bill, this is Gail Sturdivant. We approve the minutes as presented.
Thank you, Gail. Can we have a second?
This is Brian. I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes per the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay. Unless you're a horse, then that's all you can say. Right, John? Okay, thank you. Minutes are approved. John, the Board of Directors report, please.
All right, I think my mic is off, so I'm good. At the last board meeting, there were a couple of transportation items of note. More specifically, we had the 10-year transit plan and the CDOT 10-year funding plan. Those were original action items, and we went ahead and at the request of Rich Zamora, went ahead and pulled those off. But I don't want to make it sound like he was doing that unilateral. We totally agreed. There was at the state level, there's a discussion of the taking the 10% for transit, which we've already discussed, off the top. And if that comes off the top, that leaves less transit dollars for the transit projects within the region. So we went ahead and pulled that. We gave a short little summary of what was going on, but then that item will need to come back. And so since CDOT didn't have anything for us today, it will come back to the TAC next, I would assume next month, and then it will go to the board the following month. So is that April for TAC, and then May for the board again. And I think when we get to the CDOT update, I think Rob Fry and maybe others from CDOT might want to sort of touch on that real quick in more detail. But that was a discussion there. They
Hey,
did
John, what was
Yes,
what was
go
the
ahead, Bill.
reasoning for that? What was the reasoning for that?
the reason
Why they wanted to
wanting-
pull it off the top like that? Yeah.
So why do they want to do that? So, and again, you know, everything is a matter of perspective. So I'll tell you what theirs is, and then, you know, whether or not other folks want to sort of weigh in, because if you're getting funded, you know, sometimes you think something's great. If you're losing funding, sometimes you have a different opinion. So, but I think the idea is what for a while they were funding some of these Mustang and Outrider expansions, and feel free if someone from CDOT correct me if I get this wrong, but they were funding those things from rollover dollars that they had in the past, right? So during the pandemic, for example, they had X amount of dollars available. During the pandemic, they cut back on service, they saved those dollars. Moving forward, as they started up service again, they were basically running at a little bit of a deficit. And then when you look at the planned service expansions for things like Pegasus that hasn't started yet, then they start running into even more of a deficit. So what they wanted to do is to make sure that they had a sustainable funding source in the long term. They said, let us take these operating funds off of the top, and then whatever's left gets divvied up into the 5 CDOT regions. And then the 5 CDOT regions then divvied up between the different projects or counties within theirs. So for Region 2 would get less money, which means then there would be less money that would then flow into the Pikes Peak region. And probably specifically, since it's transit dollars, the group that we want to make sure is the most okie dokie with it would be MMT, right? Because it would perhaps have an impact, but perhaps not, especially if the services that they're providing off the top, if there are things that MMT would have to fund anyway or partner to fund anyway, it might be a net increase for MMT. We personally, PPACG, just wanted to wait and see to see how it all sort of panned out and what the bottom line was on the numbers. And since they sort of sprung it on us the night before, that's why we wanted to pull it off the agenda. The stack meeting happened the following Friday, and I think I'm technically taking an item out of order. So if anyone is offended by that and the blatant disregard for Robert's Rule of Order, let me know and we'll circle back to this later. But it's probably easier just to chat about it now. When we got to the stack, 2 days later on that Friday, this was, an additional sort of statewide concern of, hey, in theory, this might be a good thing, but we don't know. So bring us the numbers of how this would all work. And I think CDOT, Transit and Rail was going to sort of come back to us with a little finer point on all of the numbers. So since we've already sort of touched on that, can we pause for a second? Someone from CDOT want to say if I've got this all wrong or add more to it? Jeff, go ahead.
He wants to speak first. I can defer to him.
Who?
Rob Fry, my
Oh.
boss.
So yeah, so
Otherwise, John, that was a big nutshell. In a smaller nutshell, at the TC workshop yesterday, the Director of Transit and Rail presented to them what was discussed at STAC. And several TC commissioners were in the STAC meeting listening in. And this was also presented later that Friday, the STAC Friday, to the TRAC, with the Transit and Rail Advisory Committee. But yesterday at the TC workshop, there were 2 different options discussed. There were no actions taken. The first option was pretty much how John described it, and it comes out to about a 46.25% decrease in funding. The decrease in funding is due specifically to operations and maintenance for the Mustang family and for the planned mobility hubs that are slowly but surely coming online around the state. This option that results in a 46.25% decrease. In this, the local agency capital projects would remain in the 10-year plan, So in your case, as an example, the Downtown Transit Center, the local agency operating expansion projects, those CDOT partners, let's see, I'm only speaking about rurals in this case, so not Mountain Metro, but our rural partners, Division of Transit and Rail, wants to embark on a service development plan program with them and provide that assistance because a lot of our rural partners are understaffed, underfunded, et cetera, and just don't have the capacity to develop 5-10-year operations plans or capital replacement plans. So CDOT, Division of Transit and Rail, and then yours truly here in Region 2 hopes to work with a lot of the rural, if not all of the rural agencies, to map out the next 5, 10, 20 years for them to better be able to program future dollars, and then hopefully to maybe possibly shift some of the state operating funding for the rurals to the federal 5311 sources. And then the second option, option B, that the TC was presented by Amber yesterday, was to keep the originally proposed amount for transit statewide. So that's maintaining the roughly $32.5 million minimum, 10% for transit in the 10-year plan. And then going forward, the Bustang family, so Bustang and Outrider, operations and maintenance would be funded, and Mobility Hub, sorry, would all be funded out of the statewide share of the MMOF pool, not the local shares that Wendy and I have been talking about with you all, that it would not affect the local amounts. We would keep rolling stock, so buses and vehicles would be included in the 10-year plan, but it's basically separating operations and maintenance out of the 10-year plan for the Bustang family and the Mobility Hub family to be funded out of statewide dollars. And that's also coming with a projected 30% fare box recovery ratio on expanded Bustang services, this second option. And just to give you guys an idea, the west line, the I-70 line on Bustang, exceeds that as it is. It exceeds a 40% fare box recovery. The south line and the north line along the I-25 corridor do not, but the projections are, with expanded service, making it much more frequent and much more convenient to entice more people out, that fare box recovery ratio does increase. Any questions?
Yeah, and Jeff, as people are contemplating their questions, when you talked about I think it was under the first option, you talked about the plan that you were going to embark on the rural service. Is that a look at jurisdictional service only, or all services? So I noticed that we had Dave from Invita on the line. Would this include sort of the things that Invita and other private folks are doing to have rural service, both as far as specialized transit and just normal everyday transit service? I guess, is there something in there for everybody, or is it just going to be a jurisdictional thing?
At this point, all that was discussed by the DTR director were the 5311 recipients, and 5311 is specific to rural fixed route and demand response operators. It's separate from the 5310 that I imagine the Invitas of the world receive, which is much more specific to disabilities, seniors, so on and so forth. So a short answer is, let me get back to you and find that out.
All right, because Dave, and again, I apologize, everybody. I know we're sort of taking this other item out of order, but the service you guys run out to Calhan, right? That's, for lack of a better term, normal transit, right? Anyone can ride that. It's not specific to 53.
It is 5311. We do 5311 throughout Eastern El Paso County.
Okay, good. And then I think with that, Brian, did you have any comments that we want to make sure that we capture from MMT, especially with the comment about the downtown center? And then B, when he's done, Dole, hopefully we answered the question.
Well, I don't know. That's the first time I'm hearing all that, so it's a lot to digest. I think anything that allows the state to do what they need to do, but not impact, funds for our services in our region here would be preferable. But, we'll have to adapt to whatever comes down. If Bustang and Outrider and the mobility hubs are funded at the state level. I mean, Jeff, I believe your Fountain Mobility Hub was one of the items that was in that that top group of projects for whatever it was, 10.6 million. So if that's removed and funded another way, that leaves more for our transit services in this region. So that's just kind of one observation that popped out at me. That would be pretty sweet. But yeah, I imagine that summary you gave, Jeff, will be shared, and we can kind of look into that a little bit more and digest it a little bit. And I'm sure we'll have more comments, but thank you.
And Jeff, since that was presented to the TC, those two options, was there slides or PowerPoints or anything that you could snag for us that we could send out to the TAC? That's sort of the two options, so everyone has a little more information.
Most certainly, and understand, please, everyone, that this is, to say this politely, news to all of us at CDOT also as well, and it's been a slightly fluid situation as far as the proposed funding amounts. And so I will happily provide links to the stack packet from, what was it, last week, and then the Transportation Commission this week. And please do, I'll point out the pages, and please do look at the proposed amounts, because they do differ between the two discussions, and there have been revisions made. And again, no action has been taken, and action might be taken next month, but that's still to be determined.
So then if there's no other questions on that, we'll hop back to the board report. Real quickly, I just wanted to point out that go ahead, Brian, please.
John, I'm sorry. And this may not be an issue, but, I think last month, what month is this? This is March. I think in February, the PPACG board did approve the highway or roadway 10-year list, right? So is that like not even being impacted by other funding sources from CDOT coming off the top, or will that need to be revisited later, or is it all transit?
I'm either having a near-death experience, or Rob Fry is coming into view. Rob,
yeah, sorry, John. I can answer that if you want. It doesn't help that I've got a window behind me, and I've got very little hair on top. So I'll stop. No laugh, and I'll stop the video, but I'll go ahead and talk.
I'll stop the video.
And I apologize if this is out of order. We can talk about, I was going to talk about at the CDOT updates, but no, that's a great question, Brian. As far as we are concerned at the moment, our understanding is that transportation projects are not impacted. So I was actually going to make the request to get that on the board agenda for April approval, and then we'll separate the transit for later. And the reason for that comes down to getting a list of projects put together for the greenhouse gas modeling. So yeah, transportation is not impacted. I think that list is good to go. There's no changes. This all comes down to transit at the moment. So that's my suggestion. I don't know if we need to talk about it here or 7A later. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, thanks, Rob.
Yep.
So then real quickly, back to the board report, if there's nothing else on this item. Under information items, if you recall back in November, there was a CDOT item on the faster safety. I think I got that right. Trying to do that from memory, sorry. So the faster thing, and we were like, well, let's hold off on those projects until we finish up with the 10-year plan. We've finished up with the 10-year plan, so we brought those back and presented it to the board as an information item. So if anybody needs their memory refreshed, we can ask to have it, maybe Shane talk about that next month, right before it goes to the board for action. But just wanted to make sure everybody knows that those older things would sort of move forward. So that's it for the board report. And I think 95% of what we were going to talk about under the CDOT item, I've noticed there's some chat things and I haven't been able, I can't multitask and read them at the same time. Does anybody want to say anything else about that before we put this whole sort of discussion down? Victoria, go ahead.
So I think the stack packet noted about $2 million less in transit funds with that 10%. Is that about right, John?
I don't know, but I see Wendy has her hand up. Wendy, do you have an answer to that?
No, I do not. That
Yeah.
would probably be Jeff or Rob.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
did not
think-
Go ahead, guys.
Yeah, sorry. I'll try to answer a couple of your questions or my understanding too, Victoria. So I think FY22, it's about a $2 million reduction proposed. And then in years 23, 24, 25, and 26, depends which scenario you look at. But it's cut, I think, anywhere from about $2.5 to $3.5 million, depending which scenario you're looking at. And that's for across the region. So I think the easiest way to look at it is we're looking at about roughly half or a little more, half to 60% less than what we originally came to you with. And then Victoria, I believe the board passed the transportation priority list, but I don't think they approved CDOT's 10-year plan. Is that correct, John?
Right. So what happened is they passed the transportation portion or roadway portion in February, and they said, hey, there's this last minute change on transit. Go back and look at it again. Went to you guys at TAC. We added the fountain project, but basically didn't do too much else to it. Then we were about to take it to the board, was it last week? And then, like I said, the night before, we get a call from CDOT management saying, hey, CDOT Denver is changing some stuff. We're not comfortable with these numbers. And then because on the board item, we had it all on one sheet. We had both the transit and the rail with the fiscal constraint. And so after talking with Rich and Andy Gunning and everything, we're like, we'll just pull the whole item, because we don't want to have to try to be in a situation where we're trying to explain to the board what we're doing with all this transit stuff at the same time saying, but then the roadway stuff doesn't change, and we want you to adopt portions of this document, but not all of it. So it was just more easy or convenient to sort of pool everything. But hearing what Rob's saying now, I think if everyone's okay with it, if transit's not ready to go, we will ask CDOT to provide us an exhibit with just the roadway projects with the fiscal constraint, and we can bring that back next time. I see Wendy has a question, if that's okay, and then maybe Brian.
So the faster list is mutually exclusive of the 10-year list in that process. So the faster list only needed to be an information item, because we have to bring that back as they fund it as a tip amendment. So it doesn't have to be acted upon because it's not a tip amendment yet.
Right. Yeah, I thought there was a question about something else, but yes, faster is different than the other. So go ahead, Brandy.
Yeah, so then Wendy, we're good to go with faster, right? There's nothing more you need from us.
Nope,
Thanks, Wendy.
we're good.
I think when it comes to faster, it's just going to be the tip amendment, right? And the board's already seen it once as information, so it should be ready. When it's ready to go, it'll go.
Right, and those projects are scheduled for 25, 26, so they won't come back until they're actually funded.
Okay.
It's just information at this point.
Thanks, Wendy.
Sure thing.
I think we're good. We're done. We'll take the awkward silence, Dole, that.
Okay, and if people have more questions in the meantime, maybe we can bring it back up at that item again, as we mentioned.
Yeah, this
So-
was all going to happen at the CDOT item. So go ahead, Brandy. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, Brian was gonna say something after Wendy, I thought.
Oh, no, I'm good. Thanks, Brandy.
Okay, then I have one quick question. Sorry, I'm late. I couldn't stop talking after the Karen Star luncheon, but so yes, the transit item was pulled last week, but I don't see it on the agenda. So is it coming back next month, John?
Yes, next month. It wasn't ready for this month, so it'll be next month. And
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're going to cut this off and move on to Laura, if you'd like to talk about your action item there under 6A.
Yes, good afternoon. I am bringing to you guys our funding recommendations that have come from the Technical Review Committee of actually the AAA Technical Review Committee, who traditionally looks at AAA funding for transportation, as well as all the other AAA different programs that are funded. This year we did something unique. It was a goal of last year, but just because of sort of the hurry up in trying to take over the program, we weren't able to pull it off. But this year we were able to pull off a joint call. And in December, we launched our NOFA for both AAA funding 5310 and the PPRTA funds that we get through the city of Colorado Springs. And so we've closed that NOFA. We have taken the applications of each of the providers and kind of structured what their asks were from each funding source to better figure out overall how to distribute our transportation dollars available for specialized transportation. And so the initial review happened by the TRS last week and actually the week before last. And these are their recommendations. So I'm going to kind of go through this, but also give a little bit of a preface to it. So this was a difficult decision for the TRS and for staff. As we were going through the applications, we were having to take into account not only what the agencies were applying for, but also just past experience and knowledge of different review processes that we have gone through over the past year in implementing this program. Our current providers and contracted providers are Silver Key, Fountain Valley Senior Center, and Invita. And so those current providers have kind of been on a little bit of a roller coaster this year, starting this new program. While they've been working with specialized transportation for several years under MNT, this is their first year of really taking on a federal program. And so it's come with its ups and downs. I'll say that from an internal perspective, but also I know it's been challenging for the agencies to kind of rise to the federal funding standards. And so as we were now analyzing the applications and working with the TRS, one of the main things that we were looking at was, how does it align with the spirit of specialized transportation? How do projects align with that? As well as what is the financial management capacity of these organizations? You guys on this call know very well the different ins and outs and the capacity needs organizations must have in order to receive federal funding and administer it. So we had to take that in account and really look at the agencies that applied and seeing how they manage their funds this first year and think about how we can help build their capacity in the future if there was any challenges that came across any agency. So I'm giving that preface as we get into this. So we had $976,528 requested of us through 5310 and PPRTA funds. We have a set budget for the next 3 years, so the next upcoming 3 years, of $816,000 available to us through 5310 and PPRTA. Now, the Ouija board act, as John says, is going to kind of, throw that a little bit for a loop. We don't really know exactly what that's going to look like, but we may see an increase of 30% in funding for this program. But we're having to work off the numbers that we currently have and the funding that we currently have available to us. So from that 976,000 in requests, we knew that we had to make some reductions in funding in terms of requests, but really wanted to look at how these agencies scored. And I included in the packet the scoring mechanism and also the scoring that we went through with the TRS committee. And so, as I mentioned before, heavily weighted in that is financial management capacity, as well as alignment with 5310 and our specialized transit plan. And so of that scoring, Invita scored the highest out of the three agencies. Silver Key was just very close behind. They had a larger request than Invita, but their request was significantly higher than their request last year for funding as well. And so as we've been looking at the overarching funds available for specialized transportation, including the AAA funds, we had to think about how to focus this funding on the broader population that is eligible for 5310 or going to be impacted by 5310. And so Invita is the only agency of the three that applied that really has a program that focuses on both seniors and those individuals with disabilities. This year has been really challenging to really keep up with the side and the needs of those individuals with disabilities that fall under the age of 60. And so while we have very limited providers in our region providing services to that population, there seems to be an emphasis and need to funnel these dollars towards that direction. While we can also utilize our AAA funds for more for those providers that are providing for participants 60 and over. So just trying to make sure that we're matching up the right funding source with the right agency is really what our goal is. So Invita scored the highest out of the three. Silver Key has an enormous capacity within their staff to be able to manage grants like this. They scored high. They do you guys know how much of an impact they have in this community with the senior services that they provide. And then Fountain Valley was scored lowest. It is the smaller agency of the three. And I want to make for sure people understand that we are working really hard with these agencies to kind of bring them up to the federal standard bar. And so in working with Fountain Valley, we determined that, we needed to take a step back this year with 5310 funding in order for them to get some of the infrastructure in place and to administer the funds moving forward. And so after doing some assessments with Fountain Valley, we determined not to fund them this year and with 5310. However, we have allowed them to adjust their ask with AAA funding. So this is kind of how it all shook out. We, again, are trying to match up the right funding with the right agency, and all of you on the call know how challenging that can be. So I am willing to answer any questions that you may have about our process that we went through, as well as what the next steps are moving forward. We are looking for a recommendation from the TAC to present to the CAC, the upcoming CAC, so that we can hopefully have a recommendation from the CAC to go to the board to open up a 30-day public comment period, which is required with this funding, so that we can have contracting out by the end of June. So an approval by the board in June, May would be best. And that's why we're kind of expediting this process and starting it early.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Any questions or comments for Laura?
Dole,
Okay.
I just want to thank Laura for going through some additional information with me earlier this week because I had some questions about them, but she did a great job in answering. And I am okay with this item and I'll move approval.
Thank you, Victoria. Do we have a second?
I'll second, but I got a question to go with that. Have you spoken with all of the agencies and explained how you came up to what you came up with, just in case we get phone calls? I'm sure that's one of the questions I'm going to get. Does everybody know the conclusions that you came to, especially Fountain Valley?
Yes, we've already talked extensively with Fountain Valley and also a member of their board, just to kind of walk them through some tools that could be beneficial for them in the future, and even offering for them to incorporate some funding for those tools in their ask of AAA funding. So we have been in touch with them. We also sent out the memo packet to the rest of the providers. Obviously, the two being funded through this are less impacted by the decision making moving forward.
All right, thanks for letting me know, and I now have it just in case I need it.
Yes.
And Brandy, we can continue with your second then.
Yes, please.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving this as Laura presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay. Okay, Laura, motion passes unanimously, so thank you.
Hey,
Great, thank you.
Dole, you did have a couple of comments in the chat from Jason from Silver Key and Dave from Invita. And again, I don't know, I want them to feel like it's a transparent, open process. They can actually turn their mics on and talk and not have to put things in the chat that they want to chat about.
Jason, do you want to speak up?
Sure. Well, thank you for that opportunity to do so. I was just saying, Laura, thanks for the comments. We have been partnered together with Invita and Fountain Valley over the course of the last couple of years, for sure, for many years, but even more intently the last few years. And we all are aware of the situation, and we've all committed that we are going to pull alongside each other to have the best options available with the resources we have, braid the resources to make sure that not only seniors, but those with disabilities have access to care. So while this is a little bit of a breather for the moment, we're all supportive of this to be able to move that forward. And I just want to stress the importance of the access to care in Fountain Valley. And I know that Invita and I at Silver Key with Dave Summers and Gail will be moving forward to be able to support access across the communities we serve. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Well said. This is Dave.
Okay, any other comments that we may have missed? Otherwise, thank you, Laura. Looks like that's approved and can move on to the next step. Which now brings us back to the CDOT update. So just for the sake of honoring the agenda, do we need are there any other standing items that CDOT would like to discuss? Even if we need to bring up the original or the previous item again?
This is Kathleen. I have no additional announcements. The big thing happening is related to the transit funding, I would say, at HQ. So no further announcements on my end. Not sure about the regions though.
Yeah, Dole, I think we covered it. As long as we get transportation in front of the board next month, that's great. We'll provide that list of projects that separates transit out of takes transportation and transit and separates them so it's easier for them to follow. So appreciate it. That's all I have.
Also, thanks CDOT for helping to kind of help facilitate the multimodal discussions. Remind me, do we know when that window is going to open?
Danelle
call
sent
for
something
projects.
out for you yesterday.
Okay.
It
Okay,
should be
anything
in
else?
your inbox, Stoll.
Okay, I must have missed it. I didn't know it opened yet, but it's not.
You got
Yep.
plenty of time. We made the schedules inside the document, and there's plenty of time, so don't fret.
And I know we have an environmental conversation with Rob coming up too, I think,
That's
March
correct.
30th. Yeah.
That's correct.
So thanks, Rob. We get to see your haze and your glow again.
I prefer to call it a halo.
Fair enough. We get to see your halo again. Okay, moving on. Greenhouse gas mitigation presentation by Teresa Takushi from CDOT.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Teresa Takushi, Greenhouse Gas Climate Program Manager at CDOT, and here to update you on the greenhouse gas mitigations. And I don't know if you have the presentation. That would be super helpful. Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Okay, so I will start off the next slide and just kind of give you an update on where we are. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the progress that we have, since the rule adoption, and then talk about our approach on mitigations. I'm going to note here that, and I apologize for this, but we actually have just recently got new direction from the Transportation Commission. So you'll notice in this agenda and then in the following slides, I'm going to talk about policy directive and kind of this procedural directive. And I want to just note here, and again, I'll note it throughout the presentation to kind of integrate this all together with the current thinking is yesterday during TC workshop, the TC has requested that procedural directive actually be integrated into the policy directive. So as I talk through this presentation, I'm going to just note that when I say procedural, it's now going to be integrated in the policy directive. So everything will now go before the Transportation Commission. So with that in mind and with that background, I'll talk about the policy directive timeline and the elements that were previously going to be procedural, but now will be policy, and then our feedback that we've received. So next slide, please. Okay, so I think it's been a few months since I've presented to this group, but just to remind everyone, the rule was adopted in December, and the reason why we're moving forward on this policy directive is in order to comply with the rule, and also because CDOT, DRCOG, and North Front Range must have adopted plans in place before October of 2022. So since the rule has been adopted, we've worked really hard to form our state interagency consultation team, which is made up of MPOs, Department of Public Health and Environment, the Colorado Energy Office, and CDOT, among others that can be appointed by our DTD director. They also, we've established work groups, and we are meeting quite regularly. I know John has been on all of these, in fact, so I really appreciate all of the team's effort to, represent MPOs and make sure that we are talking about all of the elements of modeling and potential greenhouse gas mitigations. So those working groups are meeting. The modeling group is meeting every 2 weeks, and the greenhouse gas mitigation working group was also meeting every 2 weeks. So again, there's been a lot of meetings since the passage of the rule to make sure that we are understanding how this modeling is going to work, what's required, and what potential mitigations are available. So as I just mentioned, we workshopped the mitigation policy at TC, and the Transportation Commission plans to adopt adopt this mitigation policy next month. This is where, again, I'm going to kind of speak a little bit off the slides, but bear with me a little bit. But the procedural directive was anticipated to follow that. And instead, now that will kind of come along, it will be all integrated into one. So CDOT will submit a greenhouse gas report to the TC prior to the adoption of the 10-year plan. So again, this is kind of why the timing, we're moving, we're working hard in order to comply with the rule. The next slide, please.
So Teresa, while you're switching slides, do you want questions as we go along, or do you want them at the end?
Let's do them at the end, John, just because of the change in approach. If that's okay, I think that would be really good.
I just wanted to make sure we didn't get to the end and you were like, oh, you should have asked me that a couple slides back. So
Nope, no problem at all. Thanks, John. Okay, so this has, again, I'm going to kind of speak a little bit off slide here. This was our initial thinking, was that we would do a policy directive with an overarching framework. And then the procedural directive would have all the specifics. What was discussed yesterday in the TC workshop is the desire to not have a procedural directive and instead have the TC look at all of these, look at each mitigation measure and the scoring and all of those elements as part of the policy directive. So that is our current approach as of yesterday. And again, I think that this will actually help. We've received some feedback that, you know, people want the transparency, they want to be able to participate in those mitigations. And so to have it in the PD offers that opportunity in front of the Transportation Commission. So they also recognize that there's a lot of detail in this. And so they want to be participating in that. So with that in mind, I'll walk through some of the elements of the policy directive as it's drafted. So the next slide, please. Okay, so this is really, as I mentioned before, this is going to change a little bit based on the Transportation Commission's desire to have the detail included. So I'm going to try to explain the sections, and then again, we are in the process of integrating their changes. So these are the main sections of the policy directive as was presented to TC yesterday, is that there's a process for establishing the greenhouse gas mitigation measures. So really the idea behind this is that there's a master list, there's a core list that has been approved. And so when I mentioned earlier that we've had this mitigation working group, that's what that group has been working to do, is to figure out what, and I should take a moment and back up for just a moment. I'll take to explain when these kick in, because I think that's a helpful part for the conversation. Is so basically for the rule, you need to comply with the greenhouse gas reduction levels that are laid out in the rule. So CDOT and the MPOs need to comply with these reduction levels. Now you can do that through planning. You can do it through the projects that are in your plan. If you model your projects and you comply with the reduction level, then you're good. If you model your projects and you're not complying, you can either go back and look at your project mix, or you can pick greenhouse gas mitigation measures. That's where this piece kicks in. So greenhouse gas mitigation measures are things that really, they're off model. They're things that can't be done in the model. And therefore they fall into this kind of category of types of measures that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we don't yet have the capability to integrate them into our modeling. So these measures, just how they are, is we need to collect more data. So you'll notice that the policy directive kind of explains what type of information we need in order to calculate those benefits. So again, these are measures that are off model through calculation methodologies to calculate greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And so that's kind of how they end up in this piece, in this policy directive. So with that in mind, there's this core list. So ways that we already know that you can calculate greenhouse gas emissions reductions, like bike PED, for example, that you can't do, or maybe you can't do it in certain instances, or certain MPOs can't do it in their models yet. So they have to be done off model. So that would be an example of like a mitigation measure that would be on this core list. So that's the first piece, is that there's a core list of mitigation measures. The next piece is, we heard feedback from our MPO partners that, okay, that list is helpful, but what if there's something that we think would be a really good measure, but it's not on that list. So this is a framework to propose new greenhouse gas mitigation measures. So an MPO or any member of the public, or anyone really, can propose a new greenhouse gas mitigation measure. This section of the PD allows for different criteria to be met in order to propose a new mitigation measure. This section of the PD also allows for someone to just propose an idea, maybe not have all of the metrics, but that idea could come back to our greenhouse gas team at CDOT to figure out how would you calculate that type of measure. And I guess one of the first questions would be, could it go in model? And if not, then yes, it would be a greenhouse gas mitigation measure, and potentially could be integrated into this process. So we have an existing list, we have new proposals. The next piece, on the next slide, please, talks a little bit about, okay, well, now what? What do you do with these? And so this is the score. And really the idea behind this section in the PD is that it shows how these greenhouse gas emissions reductions how they're achieved. So there's a few different ways to look at this. The first is context, so is it in a rural area? Is it in an urban area? So it's the first, you have to think about the context of the measure. Then you have to think about well, what's the application of that measure? There are different ways to apply different measures. For instance, I'll go back to that bike path example. If you have a bike path, a mile of bike path that you're using as a mitigation, that bike path is effective and it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. But if it's a protected bike lane, that achieves more greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And the reason for that is, the safety of that, there are more users on that based on that. So again, we're considering different factors in the application of each of these measures. And then also, we have, how they serve disproportionately impacted communities. So this was laid out in the regulation that we would also consider how these measures impact DI communities. So that's again, those are all elements that influence what is the actual greenhouse gas emission reduction that you get from each of these. And then the last section of the PD really talks about how does CDOT and each of the MPOs that are subject to this regulation, if they decide to use these greenhouse gas mitigation measures, what needs to be reported? And so that's a report that goes along with your plan to show that you're complying. So that's the mitigation action plan. And then there's also a requirement in the rule that if you use these mitigations, that you need to provide a status report. And that's an annual report that's submitted to basically show that you're tracking, you're meeting, you're on schedule in order to reduce your emissions. So again, because these measures are off model and because they're a little bit separate, there's these additional requirements in order to show that you're meeting the emissions reductions that you've committed to. The next slide, I think, is a schedule. Oh, okay, no, it's procedural. Okay, so again, these are the elements that we are now going to pull into the policy directive itself. So this is the actual score for each mitigation measure, the actual measures themselves. I should have started there. So the actual measures, then the score for each of those measures. And then we're looking at potentially how long can each type of measure be applied. So an example of this is like a bike path. You can expect a longevity of that, so a lifetime of that measure. So we're looking at different types of measures and what their lifetime could be. Also, as part of this is really the math that's used to establish each of those scores. So just to note here, the way that we're working through this is that the emissions reductions are real emissions reductions. We have to take the math and the calculation methodology that exists, but we are calculating actual greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So we want to show that. And the idea here is a couple of things that I'll note. We anticipate that this list of mitigation measures is actually going to shrink over time. And the reason for that is this: as we get better with modeling and as we get better to understand how we can integrate these elements into our models, we're probably going to move some of these off-model measures, these greenhouse gas mitigation measures that we can't quite model yet. We'll move them into our modeling sphere once we get enough information and we know how to do it in a better way. So we're expecting that list will shrink, and many of these will be integrated into our modeling over time. We also, anticipate that more measures will also come onto the table as we kind of figure out, as I said, there's an opportunity to bring other measures to the table. So, things will come on and then things will drop off as we get better at modeling each of these. The beauty with having them in the model as opposed to here is that they have these synergistic opportunities. So you basically can see how people make different travel choices that can be shown in a model, and it can have better benefit to greenhouse gas emissions when it has those interactions, as opposed to just an off-model calculation, which has to make some assumptions about, miles, ridership, things like that, population, other elements that go into those methodologies. So all of that that's listed on this slide will now be incorporated into the policy directive, as I mentioned. The next slide talks a little bit about the initial feedback that we've gotten. And again, a huge thanks to everyone who's been participating in this, is that we've definitely heard feedback, that we want enough mitigations, enough greenhouse gas mitigation measures that our MPOs and CDOT, we can comply. So we are really looking to integrate as many as possible into this policy directive as we can. One of the things that we are working through over the past few months is, I mentioned this, but I'll say it one more time, as we started working through implementation of the rule, we're noticing that some of the things that we initially thought would be greenhouse gas mitigation measures are in fact able to be modeled. So we're kind of working to refine the list that we've started with to say these are better modeled, whereas these other ones are better off model at this time. So we're working on that, and we will, we'll be bringing all of those forward for Transportation Commission next month. The other piece is, we definitely heard feedback to allow new ideas, and we definitely think that that framework that I discussed earlier allows for that. And we're looking forward to kind of seeing what MPOs bring forward, and also what other ideas are out there. But also we, again, we're in the kind of in this process right now. So wanted to ask if there's any other input. And I think that actually also is my last slide. So happy to stop and ask if there's additional, oh, thanks. This is our time frame, but happy to kind of explain again for the time frame piece. Because we're in the midst of the modeling and the implementation of the rule, and also we're in the midst of bringing these mitigations forward to TC. We welcome feedback. So wanted to stop there and ask if there's any questions.
Dole, I'll go first while people
Please.
are pulling their questions together, if that's all right. Hey, Teresa, I had mentioned at the STAC meeting, one of the questions I'm getting is, when will we see for the mitigation measures, sort of the math, right? How does it all work? And I think at STAC we mentioned that there was something I could send out here, or I should have sent out already. Is there, do you have like a timeline on when everything's going to go out? And is there things that you can send me that I can send out to everybody as far as sort of the math of the 40 mitigation measures?
Yeah, John. Yeah, thank you for asking the question again. So when we talked about this at STAC, the question is, so everyone wants to see the list, and I definitely understand why and how. And it's so what we're doing right now, as I mentioned, is we're trying to decide between the modeling teams that are meeting, which of these are truly off model and which are not. So when we worked together initially, we came together with a list, but many of those things on the list can be modeled. So the list that we had been working through, the spreadsheet tool, really isn't reflective of the actual what needs to go in the policy directive. So I guess I would say stay tuned, as we're again integrating this into the PD now, because the transportation commissioners want to see this too and want to see all of the math. That's what our team is working hard to get into the PD now. As far as the math specifically, again, like we've talked about over the past few months, there are in some circumstances, there are different ways to calculate these. So our team hasn't refined which is the best way. And we actually have a consultant right now. We're working with consultants to figure out and run the math through and do these scenarios that I was kind of talking about, like applying it in rural areas, applying in suburban or urban. So unfortunately, John, I don't have something like ready to share with you, but please stay tuned. And like I say, the Transportation Commission wants that in the PD now. So we are working very, very hard to get that by their mail out date.
Perfect. And Dole, if you don't mind, if I could just steal the floor for 10 seconds. Everyone knows that I've been sort of involved in a million different things involved with all of this over the last year, and I guess year and a half now. And again, I always take the opportunity to thank CDOT for all of their efforts on this. And again, they've been sort of put in a very difficult position by the legislature, and they're doing the best they can. But I want to take one extra step, something I don't normally do, and I really want to take the opportunity with all of you on the call to do it, is for the year and a half that we've been doing this, Will Mast has been right by my side, you know, taking out the slide rule and figuring out all the modeling and all the math and everything. So while I get way too much credit for the participation, I want to make sure that I've shared the blame. I mean, some of the credit with Will, because again, he's just been doing a great job, and he attends all of the same meetings I've been attending and putting a lot of effort in. So just wanted to take this opportunity to publicly thank Will for all of his efforts on the GHG. So thanks, Will.
Oh man, you don't got to bring me into this.
Can we all give Will a Zoom clap under the reactions button?
Okay, all right, thank you.
There, Laura did it. Oh, look, see, there's a bunch of claps for you there, Will. Thanks for your contributions. Okay, Will, John, since you're not one to stop, you know, a meeting, thanks for the update there, Teresa, on the GHG updates. There's a lot of information there.
I think there's a question in the chat about what is the TC mail-out date?
Yeah, so it's really the middle. I'm sorry, I should have been more specific about that. So what I meant by that is, you know, it will go before the Transportation Commission for their workshop, so that it will be included in their workshop materials, I guess is what I was trying to say. So that's their workshop is the middle of next month. So stay tuned and take a look further. The TC packet is what I meant.
Okay, any other questions for Teresa? Teresa, thank you.
Thanks, Teresa.
Okay, no more questions. Why don't we move on the agenda then? John, if you want to give us the federal updates.
Yeah, and basically before Danelle went on vacation, I said, hey, I'm happy to cover the item. Is there anything really new that you need me to do? And she's like, no, just read from the memo. So you guys can all read from the memo for yourselves. Again, I think the big news was, and I did send something out to everybody, for the first part of the Ouija Board Act, when it was funded, they had not updated the continuing resolutions to actually fund it, right? So we had a bill and we had numbers, but they were imaginary numbers, and they didn't actually have the dollars to move forward, and they're actually funding for these things. So for lack of a better term, the floodgates will start opening up, and you'll start seeing through grants.gov and these other opportunities where the funds will come in to sort of fund them. So again, if you have projects out there that's looking for funding, the PPACG has the Ouija Board Act page where you can sort of look to see if there's anything that you can kind of match up and see if there's funding available. Because again, I will reiterate, there's more discretionary grants associated with this surface transportation bill than any other bill we've seen in the past. The next quick item is, again, Andy Gunning, our executive director, is trying very hard to make sure that we can coordinate where possible to help people out to get the grants. So he's trying to put together sort of grant teams by speciality. So Mark Northrup, I see on the line here, he's sort of working with folks on broadband. Danelle and Casey are working on electrification. Paul Roche, our military manager, is doing the wildfire. I'm probably forgetting a couple of others. So Laura, if you can can remind me what the other ones are, or Mark. But anyway, we're trying to get these sort of groups together and focus on the different things. Dole, I know you got voluntold to be on, I think 3 or 4 of them for your jurisdiction. So I know you know what I'm talking about, but those are being created, and we're hoping to sort of help coordinate the flow of dollars there, so that we can all be a little more successful in tracking down those funds. I think that's all I've got under the IIJA item. Happy to answer any questions, or if someone has something that they know that I didn't mention, feel free to chime in now.
Okay, I don't have a thing that I know, but I have a question. So, and I may have missed it. Has PPACG hired a grant writer? Are you hiring a grant writer? How are we going to go about this somewhat collectively?
So we have not hired a grant writer. And if you're, I know that CDOT did hire a grant writer. And if you have, if your project is on the state system and you're doing it cooperatively with CDOT, that is an opportunity for you to work with CDOT to see if that their grant writer is available. I know that when Andy is putting together these sort of working groups for the different grant types, hiring a grant writer is not out of the question. And I think it's a matter of seeing if we can pull together the funds and do it. There is an opportunity from the transportation perspective, provided, and I think Aaron Busto's on the call, and if he's left, I might get myself in trouble, but if he's on, he can correct me or make sure I get this right. There is an opportunity, and again, we got to make sure that we dot all the I's and cross the T's, that if I put money in our budget for grant preparation in the UPWP, because I can't do it unless it's specifically mentioned and funded. But for then after there's money in there, there is an eligible expense under our planning grant that under the next UPWP, we would have the ability to help coordinate grants with folks and bring on a person to do that or a consultant to do that. As long as, again, we're careful how that works. Aaron, did I butcher that, or did I get that kind of correct?
You got that kind of correct, yes.
All right. Is there any other little nuances you want to dot, or we'll leave it there?
Let's leave it there.
Okay. So we've got that. And the other thing is that there is, I believe, some of the grants that actually allow you to apply to write bigger grants or do different grants, right? Or put together or scope out a project, right? So you sort of have to sort of look at the opportunities and read them carefully to see which ones might work best for what you're trying to do. And then Gail, did you have a couple of things you want to chat about, or do you want me to read them, or?
Yeah, I'll chat about them, John. So kind of in regards to the grants, and I think you kind of hit on it there towards the end, it's not a grant writer. We really need a team that has that technical expertise to be able to do the benefit cost analysis, to help us with some of the actual editing and preparation of these, and maybe even supporting graphics. You are right, and I'm glad you mentioned at the end that some of these do have opportunities for a planning piece of it as well, which makes it helpful. So anyway, I just want to make sure we were looking holistically at a team. And I know this, my other question isn't necessarily directly related to this Infrastructure Act, but we're getting pinged, or at least I am, and I hope others are as well, on participating in congressionally directed spending. I don't know if others have seen that, and I think I got the first ping on that last Wednesday, and I happened to see Andy right when that email comes in, and it would be good if we had one or two, preferably one project we could look at regionally for congressionally directed spending requests. And I think that the one that John, you and I probably are most familiar with, and maybe a few others as well, is the US 24 Platte and Peterson interchange improvements, and that could be a good opportunity to get some support from our senators.
Hey, Gail, I apologize because sometimes I'm not the brightest bulb in the pack. Is congressionally directed spending, is that a nice way of saying earmarks?
Yeah, that's what they call it these days.
So,
or CDS.
I wasn't quite hidden, but now that we've called them earmarks, yes, okay. But yeah, I shouldn't say we. Andy has not come to me and said, hey, they're looking for earmarks, whatever, what do you think? So I don't know anything personally about that. I have not been pinged or ponged or any other sort of table tennis game.
Okay. Well, I will forward you the requests or the information I received and the presentations that are being given by at least Senator Hickenlooper's office for these requests. But I've gotten notes from both Hickenlooper's and Bennett's office in the past week. So I'll send that to you. And if there's somebody else that wants that too, just put a message in the chat and I'll forward you that information if you want to listen and get more information about it.
But I can say that as far as the sort of putting together teams and being supportive of grant opportunities, so not necessarily writers, but all of the other sort of things. Paul Roche or Rochette, I apologize. I just call him Paul. But as a lot of you know, he used to be owner of Summit Economics. So he's on staff for PPACG, and we have the ability to maybe exercise his skills from his former life on the cost benefit sort of thing. We do know that Will and his team are exceptional at putting together sorts of things, again, as we have time allows. And we have done letters of support for projects that are consistent with the long range plan. So yeah, as we're moving forward, and if we need to sort of see how we can assist on putting some of these things to be successful, even if it's proofreading, I will go out on a limb and say I think Andy's going to be very supportive of whatever the jurisdictions need.
Hey, John.
Yes, whoever, yeah.
So thank you, Gail. I have two related and unrelated comments and questions. First of all, I think it would be great, since there are so many state grant opportunities available through 260, it would be awesome if CDOT had some sort of listserv or some way to sign up and say, hey, notify me when grants come available at the state level, because trying to keep up with all the different websites and just trying to check them every week is incredibly difficult and time consuming. And we have already missed one grant opportunity because we didn't get it until like 2 weeks before it was due, when it had like 4 months of being out there. So let me encourage any CDOT person on the phone to, help get some sort of grant listserv for the state grants that are available through CDOT, all in one place or sent out to people that are interested and want to sign up. That's my first comment.
That's a great idea.
This is Kathleen. I think what I can do is reach out to our Office of Policy and Government Relations and see if they can help us out with that. Or if Hannah's there, she can maybe help us out with that in some capacity.
Thank you very much for looking at that. I appreciate it. And is Rob still on the phone?
Yes, I just came back in. What's up?
Yeah, do you have any update on raised grants and what you might be applying for in the region?
Yeah, pauses. I'm thinking about it. And no, I don't think I have an update. I know there's for this area, I don't know which grant it is. I know the only one that I'm aware of in Region 2 is we're looking at applying for some money for some passing lanes on US 50. That's the only one I'm aware of in Region 2. I'm not sure what's going on in the rest of the state. And
Okay,
I'm not
thanks.
sure
Yeah,
if that's a raised grant.
yeah, you and I had talked about some ideas earlier. I just was curious as to whether or not they were going anywhere and if you needed any help with it. So
Yep.
sounds like it's not. So thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? I'm going to keep throwing it out there because someone always is like, oh, wait, what about this? Nothing? Okay, Jessica, would you mind going back up to the top? Thank you. Okay, any member entity announcements that they haven't had a chance to share yet?
Oh, I have one.
Okay, Victoria.
We are getting ready to kick off our major transportation corridors plan update and our road impact fee update. The two get done together. So I'll be looking forward to working with and coordinate with all of our member jurisdictions to make sure our roads connect and work together. And just wanted to let you know it was coming down the pike, and I'll be bringing it to TAC at some point and looking forward to your input.
Great, thank you, Victoria. Real quick in Manitou, Manitou's alternate member, Karen, she's going to be leaving the city of Manitou and heading to a different job. So we're going to be having a new alternate. Her name is Emily. She's our GIS technician. So she'll be attending our TAC meetings as an alternate going forward.
Dole, can I just give a quick announcement? We've just finished our spring 2022 service change public process. And we're looking to finalize our recommendation. It looks like we will be moving forward with the proposed items as planned. And that kind of includes a restructuring of Route 23, which operates in the Tut, Barnes, Galley corridor, and will be operating regular service on Memorial, Independence, and Labor Days. So we'll be looking to finalize that, pass that out to our customers, and then implement on Sunday, April 24th. So thank you.
Brian, could you put a link in the chat for that?
For what?
For your proposed changes? Or send me an email later, either one?
Yes, I will. Yep. Yeah. The public comment period is over, but I can send you, there should be a link on our website, and I'll put that in the chat. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, any other member announcements?
Yes, since Victoria encompasses the whole county, it's very nice of her to invite everybody. I think I'm more invited for my transportation plan, Colorado Springs in the county. Sorry, Dole and those to the north. I didn't figure I would spend too much of your time for what goes on in Fountain. But we finally adopted our transportation master plan, and we are in the process of updating our transportation impact fee to match that new plan. And we also adopted new street classifications. So we have those as well, just so everybody knows. That's all I got.
Thank you, Brandy.
Congratulations, Brandy. That's been a long time coming. You put
Hey,
a lot of
Brandy.
work into it.
Hey, Brandy, it's Tim. Is there any way I could get a copy of it?
Yeah, I will try my best to take this giant thing and see if it's emailable to you.
Okay, if not, we can find probably through a consultant or something like that for Connect
All right.
COS.
Yeah,
Sounds
or if you want, you can send it to us, and I think we can put it on and send out a link.
Oh, that'd be nice. All right, I'll try all of the above.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I
Thanks,
think
Tim.
we can, because Will didn't come on and say we can't. So yeah, I think we've got the capability to do that.
Yes, we can. We can host it, no problem.
Yes, I got something right. You
Okay, I'll ask again. Any other member announcements? All right. Any other items that we need to add to our future TAC meetings? I know, John, we've already talked about, I think, the 10-year plan. Anything else we need to have added to the next TAC meeting?
Yeah, so, and just so everybody knows, and not necessarily the next TAC meeting, but future TAC meeting, because again, we've got the 10-year plan item. I think the roadway will definitely come back next month, and maybe the transit, but again, we won't rush the transit, so that could either be next month or a following month. We have been working on the congestion management process, which is a federal requirement, and I think, probably not next month, but in a coming month, we'll have something for you. The Tri-County study is wrapping up, so I think Jason will come here in the next month or two. I think it's just next month, but hedge my bets just in case I'm wrong, to talk about sort of the wrapping up of that Tri-County study. After the Tri-County study gets wrapped up, Jason's going to jump right back into study mode. We have, as you all were gracious enough to do for us in the last TIP amendment, we've gotten toll credits to do the freight study. So the freight study will be kicking off for a regional thing. And again, that will put us in good stead with regional freight projects to compete on a federal stage to go after federal dollars. So again, thanks to CDOT in general for the use of the toll credits, and CDOT specifically, Kathleen and others with the freight group for being very helpful in providing CDOT data and CDOT contracts for us to do that freight study coming up. I think that's it. And I know for the long range plan, we are going to start having to bring things to you guys. I think Mark has finished up a first draft of the public involvement plan that's specific to the long range plan. So that'll come to you here shortly. And then after that gets established, I think one of the first things after that is starting to set up the citizens group for the long range plan. So we've got all of these things moving forward. I will also stress that given the new GHG rules, our long range plan process, for the next long range plan process is going to be different. And we're going to actually have to ask for a lot more detail than we normally would on projects that go into long range plans. Specifically, we'll probably need to shoot for 5-year bands of when projects would be ready to go. So we'll get into more detail later, but just didn't want that to be a surprise to anybody, because that will help us model the projects the way that the state has sort of set up the modeling process and how it has to work with looking at capacity projects. So those are the things on our radar screen that we're bringing back here. We might have to see about maybe breaking off some of the bigger things, is bringing you a 5-minute presentation at TAC itself. And then anything that's going to be a longer conversation, ask for a TAC working group, because again, we value your time and we don't want to bore you with a half hour on something that not everybody necessarily is honed in on or focused on. Anything else anybody wants us to go out and hunt down and bring? I think we're good, Dole.
Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks for your attendance today. Appreciate it. Stay warm out there. Let's adjourn this meeting.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thanks. Go Cats. Watch the NCAA.
Thanks a lot.
Root for Arizona.